Chosen one. Before you scroll away, before you tell yourself that this message is for someone else, I want you to sit with one uncomfortable question. Why do certain pains keep coming back? Why do some relationships leave you feeling the same way, even when the people are different? Why do you sometimes feel lonely in a room full of people? Why does rejection seem to cut deeper than it should? And why, after everything you've learned, everything you've survived, and everything you've tried to heal, does a part of you still feel unfinished? Don't answer too quickly, because the answer may be hiding in a place you've avoided for years, a place most people never dare to look, a place connected to the woman who raised you. Now listen carefully. This message is not about blaming your mother. It is not about creating anger. It is not about turning you against anyone. It is about understanding a truth that has been shaping your life from the shadows. A truth that may explain more about your present than you realize. Many people spend years trying to fix the symptoms of their pain. They work harder, they become stronger, they become more successful, they become more independent. But no matter how much they achieve, something inside still feels unsettled because you cannot heal a wound you refuse to identify. And today, we are going to identify it. The truth is that some of the beliefs controlling your life were formed before you were old enough to understand what was happening, long before you learned how to explain your emotions, long before you learned how to hide your pain, long before you became the person everyone sees today. A child version of you was quietly making decisions, not conscious decisions, not logical decisions, emotional decisions, deep conclusions about who you were, about what love meant, about what safety meant, about whether you mattered, and those conclusions may still be running your life right now. Think about that for a moment. What if the reason you struggle to trust isn't because you're broken? What if the reason you constantly overthink isn't because you're weak? What if the reason you keep expecting people to leave isn't because you're negative? What if those patterns began years ago? What if they began in moments you barely remember? Moments that seemed small at the time. A look, a tone, a criticism, an absence, a silence, a need that went unanswered, a moment when your heart was looking for comfort and found confusion instead. Children rarely blame their parents. Instead, they blame themselves. That is what makes childhood wounds so powerful. When a child doesn't receive the love they need, they usually don't think, something is wrong with the adults. They think, something must be wrong with me. And that single conclusion can follow a person for decades. It can follow them into friendships, into relationships, into marriage, into business, into every major decision they make. Because once a person believes they are not enough, they begin living as if that belief is true. They work harder. They give more. They tolerate more. They settle for less. Not because they want to, but because deep down they are trying to prove something they were never meant to prove. Chosen one. Maybe nobody ever told you this, but your worth was never supposed to be earned. Your value was never supposed to be negotiated. Your existence was never supposed to be defended, yet many people spend their entire lives doing exactly that, trying to earn love, trying to earn approval, trying to earn acceptance, trying to become worthy of things they were already worthy of from the beginning. And the saddest part is that they often don't even realize they're doing it. It becomes normal. It becomes their identity. It becomes the lens through which they see the world. Every disappointment feels like proof. Every rejection feels personal. Every mistake feels catastrophic. Every criticism feels like confirmation of an old fear, a fear that whispers, "You are not enough." But what if that voice isn't telling the truth? What if that voice isn't your identity? What if that voice belongs to a wound that was never meant to stay? Because here's what most people never realize. The deepest wounds are not always the loudest. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the quiet ones. The ones hidden beneath achievement. The ones hidden beneath confidence. The ones hidden behind the smile. The ones nobody sees. The ones you've learned to carry so well that even you forget they're there, until something triggers them, until someone leaves, until someone rejects you, until life becomes difficult. And suddenly the old pain returns. Not because you failed, not because healing isn't possible, but because the root is still waiting to be addressed. And that root is what we're about to uncover, because the next truth may completely change the way you see your life. Because the next truth may completely change the way you see your life. Chosen one. Most people spend years trying to fix their future while completely ignoring the place where the problem began. They change jobs, they change cities, they change relationships, sometimes they even change their entire identity. Yet somehow the same emotional battles keep returning. Different faces, different situations, same pain. And eventually they begin asking a dangerous question. Why does this keep happening to me? But perhaps the better question is this: what is this pain trying to teach me? Because pain has a language. And if you never learn that language, you may spend your entire life fighting battles you were actually supposed to understand. Think about the patterns in your life, the moments that hurt you the most, the situations that trigger emotions far bigger than the situation itself, the moments when someone ignores your message, the moments when someone criticizes you, the moments when someone pulls away, the moments when you feel unseen. Why do those moments affect you so deeply? Why do they seem to touch something far older than the present moment? Because often they are not touching today's wound. They are touching yesterday's wound, an old wound, a hidden wound, a wound that has been waiting years to be acknowledged. And here is what many people never realize. A child does not need a major tragedy to develop emotional wounds. Sometimes the deepest wounds are created by what never happened. The hug that never came, the encouragement that was never spoken, the comfort that was never given, the emotional safety that was never felt, the understanding that never arrived, the feeling of being truly seen, truly heard, truly valued. Sometimes the greatest pain is not abuse. Sometimes it is absence. And absence can leave questions that follow a person for decades. Questions like, am I important? Do I matter? Am I lovable? Would anyone choose me if they truly knew me? These questions often become invisible companions. They follow people into adulthood. They shape relationships. They shape decisions. They shape destinies, without ever being noticed. Chosen one. Imagine carrying a backpack every day for years. At first you notice the weight, then gradually you adapt. Eventually it becomes normal. You forget what it feels like to walk without it. That is exactly how emotional wounds work. You become so accustomed to carrying them that you mistake them for your personality. You say things like, "This is just who I am. I've always been like this. I'm naturally anxious. I'm naturally guarded. I don't trust people. I don't need anyone." But what if those aren't personality traits? What if they are survival strategies? What if the person you became was simply trying to protect the child you once were? That changes everything. Because survival and identity are not the same thing. The wall that protected you is not who you are. The mask that protected you is not who you are. The fear that protected you is not who you are. The wound that shaped you is not who you are. You are far more than the pain you survived. And this is where the healing journey truly begins, not when you blame, not when you accuse, not when you relive every painful memory, but when you become brave enough to ask, what did I start believing about myself because of what happened? Because every wound leaves a message. Some messages are obvious, others are hidden, but they are always there. Maybe your wound taught you, if I make mistakes, people won't love me. Maybe it taught you, I have to be perfect to be accepted. Maybe it taught you, if I depend on people, I will get hurt. Maybe it taught you, my feelings don't matter. Maybe it taught you, I am alone. And once those messages settle deep enough into the heart, they begin controlling your life from the shadows. Not because they are true, but because they are believed. And believed lies can be more powerful than visible truths. That is why some people sabotage opportunities they prayed for. That is why some people run from healthy relationships. That is why some people never feel good enough no matter how successful they become. Because success cannot heal a wound that was created by a belief. Only truth can do that. And the truth is this: you were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You were never too needy. You were never too difficult to love. You were a child, trying to understand experiences that no child was equipped to understand. And somewhere along the way, you blamed yourself for things that were never your fault. That burden was never yours to carry. But today, something is changing. Today, the hidden story begins to come into the light. Today, the old conclusions begin to lose their power, because in the next part, we are going deeper into the one belief that silently controls relationships, self-worth, and the way you see yourself. And once you see it clearly, you will never look at your past the same way again. And once you see it clearly, you will never look at your past the same way again. Chosen one. Most people think their biggest problem is the pain they experienced, but the pain was never the deepest problem. The belief that grew from that pain was. And that changes everything, because pain is an event, but a belief becomes an identity. An event can last a moment. A belief can last a lifetime. That is why two people can go through similar experiences and end up living completely different lives. One person suffers the wound and eventually moves forward. Another person spends years trapped by it. The difference is often not the wound itself. The difference is the meaning attached to the wound. The story created around it. The conclusion formed in the darkness. And this is where I need you to listen carefully, because what I am about to say may reveal something you have never noticed before. When you were younger, you didn't have the wisdom you have today. You didn't understand emotional neglect. You didn't understand trauma. You didn't understand emotional unavailability. You were simply trying to make sense of your world. And children always create explanations. If love feels inconsistent, a child asks why. If affection feels conditional, a child asks why. If approval feels difficult to obtain, a child asks why. And because children naturally see themselves as the center of their world, they often arrive at a heartbreaking conclusion. It must be me. Maybe nobody ever said those words directly. Maybe nobody ever looked at you and said you weren't enough. But the feeling settled inside anyway, quietly, slowly, deeply. And over time it became part of the way you viewed yourself. Not because it was true, but because it was repeated. Because every painful experience seemed to confirm it. Every disappointment became evidence. Every rejection became proof. Every criticism became another brick in the wall. Until eventually the belief felt like reality. Chosen one. There are people walking through life right now carrying invisible sentences inside their hearts. Sentences they never consciously chose. Sentences that sound like this: I am hard to love. I always get left behind. People only value me when I perform. If I stop giving, nobody will stay. I have to earn my place. I have to earn love. And perhaps the most dangerous one of all, I am not enough. That belief is responsible for more suffering than most people realize. Because once a person believes they are not enough, they stop living freely. They begin performing. They begin proving. They begin chasing validation. They become exhausted trying to earn something that should never have required earning. And the tragedy is that the world often rewards this behavior. People praise the overachiever. People admire the strong one. People celebrate the independent one. But very few people see what is happening underneath. They don't see the fear. They don't see the anxiety. They don't see the constant pressure. They don't see the child inside still asking, "Am I finally enough now?" Chosen one. Maybe this explains why success never feels as satisfying as you expected. Maybe this explains why compliments sometimes bounce off you. Maybe this explains why one criticism hurts more than 10 compliments help. Because wounds don't listen to logic. Wounds listen to beliefs, and if the belief is strong enough, even evidence cannot convince you otherwise. You can be loved and still feel unloved. You can be admired and still feel unseen. You can be successful and still feel inadequate, because the wound keeps interpreting reality through the lens of the old story. But here is the revelation. The story is not the truth. The story is simply the explanation your younger self created to survive. And survival stories are not always accurate stories. That child version of you was doing the best they could with the information they had. They were trying to protect you, trying to understand, trying to make sense of confusing experiences. But now you are no longer that child. You can see what they couldn't see. You can understand what they couldn't understand. You can question what they automatically believed. And that is where freedom begins, not when the past changes, but when your understanding of the past changes. Because healing is not about pretending the wound never happened. Healing is about refusing to let the wound keep defining who you are. And now we arrive at a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. A question that changes everything. If those beliefs were learned, could they also be unlearned? If those conclusions were formed, could they also be replaced? If that inner voice was created, could it also be challenged? The answer is yes. But before those beliefs can lose their power, you must understand where they came from, because the next truth is the one most people never discover. The wound was never only about what happened to you. It was also about what happened to her. And when you truly understand that, an entirely new level of healing becomes possible. Because in the next part, we're going to uncover the hidden pain that often travels from one generation to the next, and once you see it, you will understand why repeating the cycle is easy, but breaking it is your destiny. Chosen one. What if I told you that the greatest battle in your life was never against other people? What if the greatest resistance you've been facing was never outside of you? Because the truth is, the enemy rarely needs chains when he can convince someone to build their own prison. And that prison is often built from a single sentence, a single decision, a single vow. A vow created in a moment of pain. For some, it sounded like, I will never trust anyone again. For others, it sounded like, I will never let anyone get that close. And for many chosen ones, it sounded like, I will never need anyone again. The tragedy is that the vow felt powerful when it was created. It felt wise. It felt necessary. It felt like survival. But survival and freedom are not the same thing. The very thing that protected you from pain became the very thing preventing healing. And that is why some people spend years praying for breakthrough while unknowingly defending the wound that is blocking it. Think about that. How many opportunities have been lost because fear disguised itself as wisdom? How many relationships ended because self-protection disguised itself as strength? How many blessings were delayed because control disguised itself as maturity? The enemy doesn't always attack through destruction. Sometimes he attacks through agreement, an agreement you never realized you made. Because once pain teaches a lesson, the mind begins building rules around that lesson. Rules become beliefs. Beliefs become patterns. Patterns become identities. And identities become destinies. That is why this moment matters. Because what you are confronting right now is not merely a memory. It is a system. A hidden system that has been operating beneath the surface of your life. A system built around one central mission. Never get hurt like that again. And while that mission may sound reasonable, it comes with a devastating cost. You cannot fully receive love while constantly preparing for loss. You cannot fully trust while constantly expecting betrayal. You cannot fully rest while constantly scanning for danger. Eventually, the very strategies that once protected you begin exhausting you. That exhaustion you've been feeling. It is not weakness. It is the weight of carrying armor that God never intended you to wear forever. Because armor is designed for battles, not for everyday life. Yet many chosen ones are walking through every relationship, every opportunity, every season wearing armor that was built decades ago. And they wonder why connection feels difficult. They wonder why intimacy feels uncomfortable. They wonder why peace feels temporary. The answer is simple. The armor stayed longer than the danger, and now God is calling you into a different season. Not a season of survival, A season of healing, not a season of hiding, a season of becoming, not a season of defending old wounds, a season of discovering who you are without them. This is where many people become afraid, because pain can become familiar, and what is familiar often feels safer than what is free. The wounded identity creates certainty. You know how to navigate life as the hurt one. You know how to protect yourself as the rejected one. You know how to survive as the abandoned one. But who are you without those labels? Who are you without the story you've carried for years? Who are you when the wound is no longer the center of your identity? That question terrifies many people. Because healing does not simply remove pain. Healing requires transformation. And transformation requires letting go of a version of yourself that once felt necessary. That is why God often takes us through seasons of exposure, before seasons of restoration. He reveals what has been hidden. He brings buried things into the light, not to shame you, not to condemn you, but to free you, because what remains hidden remains powerful, but what is exposed begins to lose its grip. And maybe that is exactly why you found this message today. Maybe God is showing you that the battle was never against your future. The battle was against your identity. The enemy knew that if he could convince you that your wound was who you are, he would never need to stop your purpose. You would stop yourself. You would question yourself. You would shrink yourself. You would limit yourself. You would build walls around yourself. And eventually, you would forget the person God created you to become. But today, something changes. Because awareness breaks deception, truth breaks agreement, and light breaks darkness. The vow is being exposed, the wound is being identified, and the prison door is beginning to open. But what comes next is even deeper. Because once the vow is exposed, there is one final question that must be answered. Why did that wound have so much power in the first place? Chosen one, if you are still here, it means something inside you already knows. You are not just listening anymore, you are being confronted. Because what we are about to step into now is not information. It is exposure, not of your pain, but of the root beneath your pain, the part you have avoided your entire life without even realizing it. And this is the moment everything begins to shift. You see, for years you thought your problem was people. You thought your problem was your mother. You thought your problem was rejection. You thought your problem was abandonment. But none of those were the root. They were only the surface impact. The real root was the meaning you assigned to it. Because in that moment of emotional pain, your child mind did something very powerful. It made a conclusion about you, not about them, about you. I am not important, I am too much. I am not safe to love. I have to earn care. I am on my own. And that conclusion became your identity. Listen carefully, because this is where most people never go deep enough. They heal memories, but they never question identity. They forgive events, but they never break agreements. They process emotions, but they never challenge the identity built on top of those emotions, and that is why healing feels incomplete. That is why patterns repeat. That is why you keep ending up in the same emotional cycles with different faces, because the identity is still active. And now I need you to see something clearly. Your life is not reacting to your past. Your life is reacting to your identity, because identity is what decides who you trust, who you avoid, what you tolerate, what you expect, and what you accept as normal love. So if your identity was shaped in lack, you will interpret love as temporary. If your identity was shaped in rejection, you will expect abandonment even in safe relationships. If your identity was shaped in emotional confusion, you will feel unsafe even in stable environments, not because reality is unsafe, but because your internal map is outdated. And here is the most painful truth. You don't just remember your wound. You have become familiar with it, so familiar. That peace feels uncomfortable. That consistency feels suspicious. That real love feels too good to be true. Because your nervous system was trained in chaos, not in safety. And this is why God did not just send you healing. He is sending you identity reconstruction. Because healing without identity change is temporary relief, but healing with identity change is permanent transformation. Now listen. Because this is the moment the entire message becomes spiritual. Clarity. You were never abandoned by life. You adapted to absence. You were never rejected by love itself. You learned love through inconsistency. You were never unloved by God, but you interpreted God through human limitation, and that interpretation created distance where there was never distance, created silence where there was never silence, created fear where there was never rejection. This is why Scripture says, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, because God does not just heal events. He heals interpretation, He heals meaning, He heals identity distortion, and now we go deeper, because there is something inside you that has been operating silently for years. A hidden agreement, not with people, with pain, a silent inner contract that says, if I stay guarded, I will never be hurt again. If I don't need anyone, I will never be disappointed again. If I stay in control, I will never lose again. But listen carefully. That agreement is not protection anymore. It is limitation. It is blocking connection. It is blocking intimacy. It is blocking peace. It is blocking the very thing you pray for. And this is why you feel stuck, because you are praying for open doors while still holding closed patterns. You're asking for new relationships while still operating from old identity scripts. You are asking God for expansion while still protecting contraction. But now something is shifting, because awareness has entered the system. And once awareness enters, the agreement begins to weaken, because what was unconscious is now visible, and what is visible can no longer fully control you. Now I want you to imagine something, not as a theory, but as a truth. Imagine the version of you that exists without this identity. No fear of abandonment, no need to overprotect, no expectation of loss, no inner tension in love, no emotional bracing when someone gets close, just presence, just openness, just peace. That version of you is not fantasy. That version of you is who you were before survival took over, because underneath all adaptation, there is a self that was never broken, only shaped, only guarded, only covered. And now the covering is being removed. And here is the divine irony. You did not find this message by accident, because breakthrough does not arrive when you are ready. It arrives when truth becomes unavoidable. And now we reach the final shift. The question is no longer, what happened to me? The question is, who am I choosing to be without what happened to me? Because identity is not only inherited, it is chosen, and this is where freedom begins, not when pain disappears, but when identity changes, not when memory is erased, but when meaning is rewritten, not when the past is forgotten, but when it no longer defines you. So right now, in this very moment, something inside you is being invited to release, not forcefully, not emotionally, but consciously. The identity built in survival, the vow built in fear, the belief built in pain, and in its place, a new truth emerges. I am not what I survived. I am not what I lost. I am not what I was denied. I am not what I feared, and what God is restoring, and what truth is revealing. I am what healing is, rebuilding, and chosen one. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of your identity beyond the wound, because now you know. The wound was never your identity. It was only your history, and your history no longer has authority over your future. If this message broke something open in you, it was not breaking you. It was breaking the false version of you that could never carry your